What do you have to share? Because that's the same thing as giving. But what do you have to share? It's like what is the piece of you? What is a piece of you that you feel could be important? Maybe not, but what do you think could be important that you have that you can share with other people? An experience, a talent, an ability, a skill, something. What do you have to share?
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
On this episode, we're going to be talking about your pujama.
It was funny. We were talking. I'll
explain later.
We were talking about this in our preliminary chat, and you said this word, pujama, and I was just like, he's probably going to end up saying it when we start recording. I just didn't think it was going to be right off the top.
That's all I had, Evan. That's all I had. That's all I had.
Well, why don't you explain a little bit, Brandon?
Well, I was going to use folks. You used that last week. You're like, folks, is that still in?
Folks, yeah.
I don't know if it's in, but it's a word.
It's still a word, yeah.
It's still a word.
It's still a word that refers to peoples and groups of individuals.
Yeah. So listen, folks, we're going to talk about pujama. Pujama is a made-up word. I made it up. I don't know if it actually means something else in some other language. And if it does, well, it does. But anyway, this is the law of meaning. And we were discussing earlier, Evan, about how you were looking at the word purpose, and you had kind of found that you didn't want to use the word purpose so much anymore. You wanted to use the term your calling. And you had some really interesting points about that. And I thought, they were great points. And you can get into that in a moment. But with the word purpose, we can have all these connotations with it, all these connections to the word. And so, when a word becomes kind of trapped in an old psychology or an old philosophy, it's very hard to remove those connotations. And so then anytime you hear the word purpose or meaning or something like that, it's tied in with all this other stuff. And so you can't understand it freely, which is why I said, well, you could make up a word, and I just made up a word, pujama, as a way of saying, like, whenever you're talking about meaning or purpose, maybe use a word like pujama, is something I'll use for now.
Yeah.
Because it's a new word to me. It has no meaning whatsoever except the meanings I'm attributing to it now.
Yeah.
And since we're in the law of meaning, this is kind of a fun game. You can actually literally describe anything in your life with a totally new word. Just make it up. And the benefit of that is that the word is free of any meaning it previously had prescribed. And so you're free to begin to interpret that word from your own terms, and that's freedom and autonomy. Freedom and autonomy has a lot to do with meaning, but consider this, folks, that we are imprisoned by meaning, that we are actually trapped by old psychologies, old philosophies, old meanings, old attributions to words. And so long as we use those words, we're imprisoned to the meaning of them. And so then we can't actually be free to make a new meaning, which actually might be better and actually might be more accurate. But, our parents used it that way, our teachers used it that way, society used it that way, so forth. So
yeah,
this is kind of exciting. We're going to get into this.
This is a really interesting one because, like you're saying, like meaning is both can be imprison us, but it can also be a liberator. Of us. It does both. Yeah, it does both of these things. And again, the idea is with this show, it seems that that it's really about becoming conscious of how some of these things kind of operate in our lives. And there was something about this whole thing in meaning. Oh yeah, I want to just touch on this very quickly. Is if you listen to our Law of Story episode, we did talk about story as if story and meaning We might have kind of been using it interchangeably, but we kind of came to this discovery today that you're like, you know what? Meaning is actually its own thing. You know, the story and meaning are very much linked together. They have a very special relationship, but they are separate entities. They are separate energies and laws that kind of run around.
Yeah, I think you know, they're a nice pair. They work together well. But, you know, story, I mean, just to do a little recap, and I mean, listen to the episode on story if you want to get more into this. But, you know, from story, it's just a perceptional way in which we understand the world and make sense of it and make meaning out of it. But like we use patterning, we put events together, make them mean something. We filter and frame, meaning that we filter certain things that are our values and that are important to us, and we filter out things that are not important to us. And then we frame, we look at things as minutely as we think is important or as expansively as we think is important. And so, you know, if someone's ever taking something way too serious in your perception, it's usually because their framing is really close in on something. And you're like, why do you care so much about that? Like, there's this whole other picture going on here. But they're like, no, this is so important. And it's like, is it though? And that's why when someone's feel like, you know, don't be so serious, it's usually the person who's being serious has taken the minute thing. But sometimes the person who's serious is drawing attention to a detail that the person who only sees maybe a bigger picture doesn't realize is a very important detail. You know, like Steve Jobs wouldn't be Steve Jobs if he didn't take certain minute details seriously.
Yeah.
But anyway, the law of meaning, the law of story are tied into these types of things because what we make meaningful, we draw our attention to, and what we draw our attention to often informs our values, our actions, you know, all sorts of things. I mean, we're about to open up a big ass can of worms, so get ready.
Yeah. As you're talking, it just made me think of the old expression, don't make a mountain out of a molehill. That's like that. It's very much a saying and a kind of a wisdom about meaning.
Yeah.
You know, don't make something more than it is, or don't sweat the petty stuff. You know, it's like it's kind of like, hey, like let's gain some perspective on this. You know, is this that important? Is this really worth getting all bent out of shape about? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're just kind of scratching the surface here.
You want to go deep right off the bat?
Let's go deep.
Here's some questions. I always like to try and throw in questions. It's the philosopher in me.
Questions are always a great way to begin a dialogue. So.
Because I feel like questions are what create the curiosity and create the in for people. So if you ever ask this question, like you ever ask why? Why about anything? You know, you're looking in many ways for meaning.
Yeah.
If you ever go like, who cares? So what? That's a search for meaning. If you ever go, what's the point?
Yeah.
Search for meaning. Another couple really good one is, what's the meaning of life? Well, we're going to get into that. That's a great one. We're actually going to dance.
Are we? We're gonna.
Yeah, we are.
Here on this episode, folks, we are going to tell you.
No, we're not going to tell you we're not going to tell you the meaning of life, but we're going to get into the meaning of life and help you to begin to see it for yourself. Because here's the great thing about the meaning of life. No one can tell you what it is except you.
Yeah.
And we're going to show you that. But if you've ever asked this question, why is this important? Why does this matter? Another search for meaning. So these questions, this law helps us figure out a lot of these questions. And also I think the law of meaning is is how we deal with things like depression and sadness and aimlessness, or even figuring out if what we're doing is a worthwhile pursuit or not. And this is way of the artist. So is the way you're going, do you have a why on your way? You know, you're going to need that because for you to go through the trials and tribulations and adversity and challenges and the suffering, which might be partly necessary for you to get to where you need to go, well, you're going to have a good why, and you're going to have meaning. And meaning is what gets you through the trials and tribulations. Without this law, you just won't be able to do it. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to find your why, your meaning. And so this is, I think, it's kind of one of those great things because it's it's challenging conceptually, but I think it's actually quite simple when you boil it all down. It's just that it's been presented to us like this mythical kind of like almost like God send, and you don't have to have all those answers to use this law. Mm-hmm. Sometimes all you need is in a sense, I think we kind of boiled it down to, is all you need is a feeling.
Yeah.
Or a sense about something. You don't actually have to actually understand it. Why kind of can come in a feeling, and that's weird for us because we're always like, wait, if I don't intellectually understand it, how do I know why? Sometimes your heart or your body or your soul or whatever this thing is, your spirit knows before you know consciously, and that can be enough.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's like if you look at, like your favorite movie or your favorite album, and I'm sure that you can explain all of the reasons why you love this movie or this album. You say like, oh, well, like when they did this and that and whatever. But it's like when usually when you get right down to it, it's like, yeah, those are all very fine and great rational reasons as to, and opinions as to why you like it. But it still comes down to, it's just like, there's this feeling, like, for example, my favorite movie is Almost Famous. Now, is it the greatest movie ever made? No, probably not. Like I'm sure there's an argument to be made of lots of films that are better for all kinds of different reasons than that. But for whatever reason, and again, I have my reasons for loving it. I'm like, I love the era. I love like this story and how this thing kind of unfolds and the music and the soundtrack in it. These are all very great reasons. And I was actually just thinking about this recently. I was actually just thinking about this the other day. I'm like, what is it that I like when people ask me, what's your favorite movie? I go Almost Famous. It's still my favorite movie. And it's like, and why do I watch this movie every single year? What is it about this story? And I hit a point where it's like, yeah, okay, there's all of these reasons as to why, but it's like, why do I even care about this era? Why do I care about this music that's in it? Why do I care about this story? And to try and just rationalize all of that kind of just doesn't necessarily kill it, but it just doesn't really do it justice either. I hit a point where I just go, I just love this movie because I just love this movie, and that's actually good enough.
Yeah,
and in fact, that's almost in many ways a better way to go about it. In some senses, it's like where I don't have to justify my love for this movie. It's just like, I just love it.
Who even knows if you justified it, if that's actually why? Like, yeah, I don't think that we often know why we like or dislike something as much as we think we do. Like, it's a funny thing because when someone asks you like, well, why this or why do you like that, especially when it comes to art, it's one of those things where it's like, it's not really explainable. And I think what people try to do is they try to explain with rationale and logic. And what you'd actually be better off doing was explaining the feeling. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, my favorite movie is Fight Club. And I could get into like, well, it talks about masculinity and the ego and the self and how really it's just about self-acceptance and like how it's talking about what our generation is at. But really, it's just a feeling. The feeling is I was 16 years old. My parents were split up and we lost everything. And I had a movie out there that talked about how materialism doesn't define me. And I felt like someone understands this struggle. I felt this is what it's like to be a young man in a world which is telling me to be a certain way. And I feel okay because I'm looking at it going like, maybe there's something in here that's helping me to kind of figure out whatever. And I feel that. I don't know how to explain that. And so Almost Famous for you, I mean, I think about the time era of the movie and the time you probably saw it was also probably a pinnacle time in your life of just in the title, Almost Famous, and I know a history of your life and going into acting and doing all of this and how that probably helped you have a feeling about a dilemma or something that was going on internally. How do we even get into the psychology of that? That's so like, right?
And
how
you
do we
can,
explain?
and
we could,
and it's interesting, and there's something that is kind of fascinating about all of that. And like for me as well, like with Almost Famous, like the first time I saw that movie, like I and still to this day I relate to it a lot, because this is a story about a kid. For the most part, it's about this kid who ends up on this crazy trip writing for Rolling Stone. He's not really popular. In fact, he finds out in the movie that he's younger than everyone else in his grade. Like, and I wasn't ever younger, but I was always looked like I was younger than everyone for a long time. So it's like, there's all of these things that, it's like, oh, you could reduce it to that level of things. Like, oh yeah, but to a large degree, it's just there's all of these things kind of come together, and it just hits you, it just touches you in ways that are logical and some that are illogical, and ways that we probably can't even completely fathom, right? But it expresses something for us. It connects us in a very profound way that is mostly, again, it's felt more than it's necessarily understood. It's like, especially when you first see it, when you first see a movie that you just fall in love with, like, because again, it's like it's falling in love with, you see something or just falling in love. There's the word fall that's in it, which implies a loss of control. There's an irrationality to it. There's just like, you're flailing, you're just like, you're out of control. You're falling.
You know what's so great about this? So we share our favorite movies, which is one of my favorite things to talk about with people. Not so much because, it used to be because I really cared about their opinions about films and just wanted to understand how people perceive them. But, our listeners might not even notice what we did there. And we didn't even notice what we did because we did it so naturally. We told stories about story. Mm-hmm. Like you said, he found out he was younger than everyone in his grade, and I wasn't necessarily younger, but I looked like I was younger, which is part of your story, relating to the story. Do you see how meaning gets caught, right? So like, I look at mine, I told my story. I'm like 16, my parents got split and we lost all our money. That's a story around Fight Club. So I think what's really interesting for the artist, because we talked about the master artist, is I think the master artist needs to have the trust and faith that their story, whether they understand it and are consciously aware of it or not, is not really what's important, but that it's in there, and that they simply need to have the faith, the connection to their, and I'm just going to use this word again because I think it's a good way, pujama, their thing, their meaning, their purpose, their calling, that doesn't need to be understood, simply felt. And that if you go towards that, great things happen for you. Mm-hmm. And not because it means something grand or because it's a godsend or whatever, or maybe it is, but that doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah.
But the fact that...
In fact, it's important to kind of like, I think, look at it from the perspective of like, it doesn't matter where it comes from necessarily, right?
Like a word that doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Like this word, right? Like, so, I mean, I'm just saying it because I think like it's a great way for people to take this concept and run with it. You can use your own word. I'm just using this word pujama as a word for me. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, it has no attachment to anything or anyone. Yeah. And the thing is it's funny because the more I've said it, we've had this conversation, I've been saying this random word, random to me at least, but I've been saying this word and I've been growing fond of it. We've been talking. You know why? Because I've been building connotations and relationships to it.
No, it has meaning to you.
Now it has meaning. A word that didn't have any meaning or was just a funny thing that I said turns out to now have some kind of pull. And if it helps me better work my way through the world, that's when the law of meaning, I think, kind of serves you. Mm-hmm. It's just a great tool. I mean, that's the great thing about this law, is a great tool you can use, because if you're feeling like pointless, purposeless, not motivated, whatever, the law of meaning is going to be the thing that's probably going to help you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can both help you to see where you've created, because in many ways the meanings that we create, and again, I think this is an important point, is we create meanings. Mm-hmm. Meaning is not inherent in our reality. We create meaning out of things. You know, like even in scientific discovery, right? Which is a very objective, you know, and it's an important thing that we do. We to look at things from an objective standpoint. It's an important spectrum of our experience, and for us to understand things. But there's a whole branch of science and scientific philosophy that exists because a scientific discovery is made, and we go, okay, it's just kind of, there it is. It's almost, it's an object. It's like, okay, so we have discovered this. But then there's a whole other side that has to come in and say, so what does this mean?
Well, what does the data mean?
What does the data mean? Why, again, these questions that we ask, why is this important? Right? Like what is, and so now we create a meaning out of it. And it's such an important part of our humanity. We are so driven for meaning in our lives. And we are creating meaning in our lives all the time because it's part of the fabric of who we are. And being conscious of it helps us to let go of old meanings that don't serve us and help us to form meanings that do. And I think that this is really where the power of this law starts to show itself, right? Because we are very much, I guess this is where choice comes in on this one too, is like, in many ways we get to choose the meaning of things. We often look at the events, the stuff, and again, we create meaning for absolutely everything. If you look around yourself right now, wherever you are, look around at everything that's around you. Like if you're in your car, maybe you're in your living room, whatever, look around you. Look at, if you're doing the dishes, look at the glasses that you have. You picked those glasses. Or maybe you didn't pick those glasses. Maybe your partner picked those glasses and you hate those glasses. That's a meaning that you've created.
Yeah.
Right? There's like, we've created meaning with absolutely everything. You know, from the very simple and mundane to the kind of what we would determine as the big events and moments of our lives. And how we filter that, how we frame that gives those things meaning, and those things shape our lives. And the thing is that that's where we have a kind of a responsibility here in all of it, because very often we're creating meanings that aren't serving us and that reduce us down into something that isn't very, I don't know the word that I'm looking for, but we can reduce ourselves in these meanings. We can either reduce ourselves or we can raise ourselves, I guess, is really the point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah, the law of meaning's this double-edged sword. You know, it's like
as a lot of these things are.
Yeah, I mean, it can really, you can use it to hurt yourself with. And I think a lot of us do. I think, you know, people who are in a destructive or depressive place have made things either meaningless or they've created adverse meanings to themselves. You know, they've made things mean things against themselves. And I think, like, the law of meaning is like one of those things where first you need to kind of understand what it is you're holding. Like, you need to understand that you have a knife in your hand, you know, and if you're careless with it, you'll cut yourself, you'll cut others, you'll hurt people, you'll damage things, you'll whatever. Like, you have something that you can just swing around and do stuff with. So you need to first be aware of that. Because once you're aware of that, then you become mindful with it. You go, oh, like, take anyone here who's listening to us. If you had something like dangerous in your hand, like maybe you had a gun or you had a knife or you had a whatever, and there's just children around you everywhere, how would you handle that piece of equipment? Now, you're carrying it with you everywhere you go. What would you do? Like, how would you deal with it? I mean, that's what meaning is. You know, it should be a term, holster your meaning, you know, because like, seriously, like we take meaning and we just use it as a weapon and we go, oh, they did this, so that means this and whatever. And it's like, does it? Right?
Yeah, sometimes we take the meanings that we've created and we just accept them, at face value as being
reality.
Yeah, yeah, and it's important for us to recognize that not everybody thinks that Almost Famous is the best movie ever made.
It is important for us to realize
It is important for us to realize that. And I recognize that. It's not going to be everybody's. In fact, I'm sure there's probably people who are just like,
Yeah.
Didn't really care for it.
Someone who hates it.
There might even be someone who hates it. I have yet to meet that person who's hated it. Most of the time, the reaction I get from people is just like,
"Get out, more,
yeah,
Evan."
Nice, good movie, good movie. That was a good one. But yeah, like, and this is, this is kind of a very, almost a very fluid kind of law to work with. Because even like at the start of the conversation, you brought up how I was changing this thing about this word usage of purpose, right? And if you've listened to some of these past podcasts, you've heard me just like on this word of like purpose, have your sense of purpose and blah, 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 blah. And it was a weird thing coming up against. It's like, you know what? I don't even like this word. I don't know if I agree with this word on some level. And coming to a place of like, I'm going to start referring to it as calling as opposed to purpose. Now, that whole thing that happened in my head and in my being is like, it's completely my own meanings that I'm creating. I've created a meaning out of purpose that I don't like anymore, right? And to a degree, you could say it's kind of meaningless. But for me, it isn't meaningless. There is something about using the word calling that is more meaningful for me than the use of purpose. And I have my reasons, and you could agree with me or disagree with me hearing my argument on the whole thing. But really, it comes down to me. It comes down to my understanding, again, how it affects me. So this is kind of one of these little tricky things about it, because there is certainly a degree to which I acknowledge and recognize that this whole kind of little game that I'm playing with this like word usage, purpose or calling, some people would be like, who cares? It's the same thing to them. But for me, it isn't, and I can't, again, as we were saying, I can't even fully rationalize that as to why one word is different to me than the other.
Well, I think it's a situation like this. Snow is not just snow to an Eskimo. There's ice, there's sleet, there's all sorts of words for snow. And for you, you think about purpose a lot. Purpose has now become not just purpose. Purpose has become more defined, more specific for you, because it's an area in which you feel called to go towards. And so you're looking at it going, well, you have a relationship to purpose. Purpose is like to an Eskimo a certain type of snow. And you look at it and you go, well, this is not actually like, here's the thing. Would you call all snow ice? Or would you call some snow icy? Would you, like there's, would you call sleet snow? Like I might call sleet also in the category of snow. So like for you, like this is the funny thing. We're getting into this whole meaning thing. I think what's going on, this is my guess, but I'm thinking what's going on is you're looking at calling as a much better all-encompassing word. Purpose then becomes more of a type of your calling, as opposed to maybe where purpose becomes the kind of pinnacle word. You kind of break it down and then you go, well, what's your calling? Because to you, and from what we've talked about, this is my best guess, but you're looking at it more from like, you find meaning and purpose more in a feeling, and that's more of a calling, and this is more like not understood. And a calling is like, hey, come over here. Come do, that's how I hear it, right? So come over here. As opposed to purpose is like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to, that's how I hear it.
Yeah.
And so the other thing too, you said like, I just want to kind of comment on what you said, because you said, well, it only matters to me. And it's like, yes, that's true. But also, if you're marketing and communicating that to other people, you might be sensitive to the fact that we're all have connotations to purpose as well. And so by you not using the word purpose, you can actually free us up as listeners to be like, oh, he's talking about your calling. Oh, it's kind of like purpose, but it's not purpose. And I hear it differently. And then I might actually get your point because it wasn't caught up in all of the other times, this word was used and abused maybe, Because like you mentioned something earlier in our talk about how purpose is so connected to drive. And I find that too. I find with purpose, it's like I have to be driven. I have to have this like kind of willingness to go through anything. But calling is kind of like, hey man, come over here. This feels good. This feels right. There's not going to be a lot of work. Just come this way. Try this out. And that's a nicer feeling for me. So like when I think about purpose and I'm feeling purposeless, it's really hard to have purpose. Mm-hmm. When I think I'm feeling purposeless and I hear someone say, what's your calling? I might go, well, I kind of like this. I feel like that. It's like, well, why don't you go towards that? That's gentler. It's easier.
Yeah.
But purpose or drive is like, I have to be really clear and focused, and like it's hard. It's like work, and I'm gonna have to get over some adversity to get there.
Yeah, there's a weird kind of tension in the whole thing, where
right.
It's supposed to, like, even if you're not even sure of what your calling is, you can still ask the question. It's like, well, what do you feel called to?
Yeah.
Right now, what do you feel most called to?
Yeah.
At this moment, and it kind of opens up a floor. At least that's my experience of it. I think
that's exactly it. I mean, what you've demonstrated by bringing this example up was like basically that you can find a meaning which is more something that serves you more.
Yeah, and
serves what you're trying to do more. Because that's the thing, is like just because like we understand something one way doesn't mean it's just because we found meaning in it doesn't mean it means that. Like, I think this is the thing where meaning kind of like every person is responsible for the meanings they make, but also we're responsible for continually working within those meanings. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And we maintain those meanings, and
what we make mean something is basically what both binds us and frees us.
Yeah.
So like, if you say like, well, if someone leaves the house, if my partner leaves the house and doesn't hug me, doesn't acknowledge me, doesn't even say goodbye, that means they don't care about me. Mm-hmm. Does it, or does it mean that they were in a rush? But if you take it as it means they don't care about me, something's wrong, well, then you might look into that and you might start to make that into something that it's not, right? I think meaning's one of those, it's precarious little thing, because you can start to attribute meanings to what other people do and what they think.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous game, because really, truthfully, the law of meaning, I think it would state, you may know what you mean, but you'll never fully know what anyone else means. You may come close, but don't attribute meaning to them. Mm-hmm. Let them tell you what they mean.
Yeah.
Don't assume meaning. I think the danger of this thing is when you use the knife against yourself is when you start to assume meaning in others. Intent. Is another word. Like when you go, oh, they did that because they hate me. It's like, did they do it because they hate you? Or did they do it because they were only thinking about themselves and you didn't factor in? And then you go, well, I don't factor in because that means I don't matter. Does it mean that you don't matter? Or does it mean that they were preoccupied with other things and you are not the center of the universe?
Yeah.
But we have all sorts of ways of taking meaning and weaponizing it against ourselves and against others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially, and like it is. It's like it's most kind of very obviously evident, when you see, or if you know somebody who flies off the handle, quite a bit or something. It's just like that's usually someone who's like created all kinds of very dramatic meanings to things, and this is the thing that's tricky about meanings and where it can be used against us, is that we can really lose touch with, like, we create, this is getting down into a weird rabbit hole perhaps, but like the thing is
let's
that
go down a little, let's see what happens.
So it's like our meanings create our reality, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the truth.
Yes.
Right.
Totally.
So it's like, your partner didn't hug you or whatever on their way out the door.
They hate me.
And then it's like, they hate me. Oh my God, I'm freaking out. And so you've created this meaning out of this thing, and it's real. For you. This is real. You are experiencing this. You are going through this. There's
it's
all
real
this
for you. That's your reality.
That is your reality.
You're real.
But it doesn't mean that it is the truth of what is actually happening. So this is where it's very important for us to try and become aware and to see kind of what our minds are doing, the meanings that we are creating, especially when we're causing ourselves distress. Mm-hmm. When it's causing a lot of distress, anxiety, depression, these types of things, like before we want to, because we can all agree that these aren't necessarily emotions that we desire to have, but we have them, but within those things, and this is where I think adversity comes in, in many ways, those emotions are a kind of adversity that are presented to us. And through that adversity, it challenges us to maybe take a second and go, okay, hold on. What is the truth to this thought, this meaning that I've created out of this? Is there any? Is it possible that I have misread this situation? Yeah. We can all probably relate to a situation where we've misread something. I remember one time I was at a friend's birthday party, and and there was drinking going on and whatever, and there was this girl there who her and I, we had dated a couple of times. We had tried it, and it never really worked out. And so some things were kind of up in the air, and so we were at this party, and we were dancing for a little bit, and then later on outside, she was very emotional, and she's talking to me, and she was just going, she's like, I don't know what to do, and blah, blah, blah. She was going on singing, and I'm going, oh my God, did I lead her on? I've led her on, and now she's like upset. She still has feelings for me. Yeah. I'm like, oh my God. And then, so I was just like, listen, everyone's been drinking. We've all been drinking. Let's talk about this tomorrow, okay? Like I'll give you a call and we'll talk about it. And she was like, okay, all right, sure. So before I talked to her the next day, I talked to another friend of mine, and it turned out that they had a big blow up. They had gotten into this big fight, which I was completely unaware of.
But she thought you were aware of it. But
she thought I was aware of it. Great. And so the way that the conversation went...
Situational comedy,
it was totally awesome. Situational comedy, where it was just like, it was almost like it's almost too perfect. You're like, that doesn't happen. It happened for real. Where it was like, the way that she was talking to me, I thought she was... it was this whole thing, but at the same time, here was me bringing in all of these meanings of like, oh, we have a past relationship, blah, blah, blah. This is about me and her. And she's got these feelings still and blah, and it had nothing to do with it. And I was so glad I had a conversation with my friend before I talked to her.
No kidding.
But I was so relieved at the same time. I'm like, oh my God, this has nothing to do with me. Thank God. But this was like...
Okay, you bring up an amazing point here. This is such a good story, too. But you bring up an amazing point. The law of meaning, we have a tendency to make things, in my opinion, I'm going to say this, because it's maybe not fact, but I actually believe, and in my opinion, we actually have a tendency to make meaning about ourselves. The very, very common, and I think most people would agree, that because we spend a lot of time in our own worlds, thinking about ourselves and thinking about how we relate and factor in and all of this, we have a tendency, I believe, to actually make things mean more about us than they actually do.
Yeah.
And this is part of the challenge with the law of meaning, is where we run into trouble. guys who have trouble asking out women because they're scared of rejection is just the law of meaning at work against them. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, she's rejecting me because I'm not good looking enough, I'm not wealthy enough, I'm not popular enough, blah, 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 whatever. It's like, maybe not. Maybe that actually has very little to do with it. And then the thing is like, you know, maybe that actually is a factor in it, but maybe it's not as big of a factor as you actually think it is.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is the law of meaning is this very funny thing, because you may find that if you use the law of meaning, and this is my experience, when you use the law of meaning to actually serve you, you actually find that the thing that you thought you couldn't get over, you can. And here's why. Like, for example, you're talking to, I'm just saying, guy and a girl talking together. Guys tend to be, not all guys get over the fear of just approaching a woman. You know, in fact, more and more I find men, because so much people are using phone and internet dating now, people are more scared to approach each other, right, even as friends, which is actually how it always happens. Is you always approach someone as a friend. Mm-hmm. But people, they try to like skip steps, right? Anyway, sidestep. So you go, well, what are you making it mean? The very talking to this person. Like, if I talk to this person and they don't do XX or whatever, it's like, well, that means this. And it's like, if you didn't make it mean that, how might that change the way you talk to them? You see how we set ourselves up for the very disaster? Like if we preemptively assume that some person's response means something, like here's a great example. This is the perfect example. When I was in college, just before I went to university, right? I was dating this girl, and she basically cheated on me, and I was like heartbroken, and I was like, I'm going to college and I'm going to meet all the women. I'm going to just...
all of them.
I'm going to meet all of them. I'm going to date everybody. Because I'm not going to let because I felt really like, as a man, I felt emasculated. I felt like, whatever. And I had to kind of go out in a certain way. There's a little mission I was on to just prove that I was attractive, that I was, whatever. So I was going out and I was trying to I'm going to date women. I'm going to meet new people, and I'm going to put this event behind me. And the first thing I noticed when I started approaching women, and I would do this constantly, and I ended up dating a lot of women and meeting a lot of people, and guys would always ask me how. But the first thing I noticed was that usually the first thing I said to people didn't even really register with them, because they were so surprised often that I was even talking to them. Like, they were in their own little world, and usually because I wasn't sitting there thinking about it, should I talk to her, should I not? I was just like, I saw a girl I liked, I went and I talked to her. No thought, just action. Yeah. Which is a great way to be, by the way. But anyway, I went up and I talked to them, so they couldn't preemptively have seen it coming unless they'd already noticed me. And a lot of the time I noticed that they didn't hear the first thing I said. And the first thing I said was just like something like, I remember one of the first women I ever approached, and she was looking at a picture because there was a bunch of posters around at the sale. And I said, something like, what do you like about this image? And she looked at me and she goes, what was that? And I went, yeah, what do you like about this? And she's like, oh, well, and she didn't even hear what I had said. Yeah. Because and I looked at her face. I remember this so vividly. Her trying to process the fact that, you're talking to me. Oh, I matter. Oh, I'm, it wasn't about me. I just remember she was trying to think about her, like how she looked, how she was being. That was what was going on for her. We later talked about this. But so people, so I might have approached her. She doesn't hear me, and she goes, "Oh, she doesn't want to talk to me," because she looks at me like, "What are you saying?" Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. It's like meaning. I think a lot of the time we can take less meaning in some things, and then we can enhance meaning in others. But we should only enhance it when it serves us, and when it doesn't serve us, we just need to remove it. Mm-hmm. We need to get rid of it. Like, not try and assume it. Yeah. Like if you can't for sure figure out what the meaning is, don't try and make it up. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Sometimes what that means is to like take a second, be patient, and just see what's happening and probe a little bit further into it. And then you might discover what something means, right? And then you can shoot off into all kinds of meanings from there.
Well, and the other thing too is you can with people interaction, you can kind of begin to assess whether someone likes something or doesn't like something. But whether they like it or not, you don't have to take it personally. Just understand that maybe they either don't like it, or another thing you can kind of observe is, are they comfortable or not comfortable? One of the things that I've noticed a lot with people is like, I usually can tell if someone's not going to like something. I mean, it's just human experience, but I can tell often when someone's a little uncomfortable. And so I make accommodations for their discomfort. So It's like, oh, this person, I'm approaching this person and they're uncomfortable. That's what I'm getting off of them. They seem uncomfortable. So let's look at how to make this situation a little more comfortable. I mean, like, I don't like to just go on about dating, but here's another thing for men. I mean, you go and approach a woman and you get in her personal space and then she backs off, maybe not because of you, but because you encroached on her personal space. Maybe because you made her uncomfortable. Maybe what you needed was space. And this goes for anything. You get right up into someone's face and you're like, how are you doing? And you're like nose to nose.
Yeah.
They're not going to react very well, probably. Mm-hmm. Especially even if you know them. I mean, that's a weird thing to do, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's totally. And for a lot of women, especially like if you were talking like an environment like a bar or a club or something like that, it's constant. And there could be all sorts of things happening on. Maybe she didn't even want to come out that night. She's out of obligation and in a bad space. It has nothing to do with you. It's just there's all kinds of things that could have happened on the way up there. It has nothing to do with you or how you look or what your approach is. But if you make it mean that, then you take this like scientific experiment. And I don't want to make this all about dating. I just think it's such a great example because we can all relate to it so well. But it's like, you might go and be like, oh, it's me. I didn't dress well, or I don't look good, or my approach, whatever. Like, instead of like understanding that everybody has their own world going on, their own reality. I think what the law of meaning is really like, where it becomes first most powerful, is us all accepting that we all have our own reality, but the truth is very hard for all of us to see. Yeah.
Because the truth is the person that can understand and factor in that we all have a different reality.
Yes.
I think where we make errors is we believe our reality is someone else's. I don't think I'm good enough, so I assume they don't think I'm good enough. They don't know if you're not good enough. They're not sitting with you, looking in the mirror, doing all that stuff. You do that. Yeah. Your reality is being brought into their reality, and you're projecting it and pushing it on them. Mm-hmm. And then in some ways, because you're pushing it on them so hard, they have no option but to see the reality you keep spitting at them.
Right.
But if you come at them and go, I'm good enough, I'm valid, I can talk to you, man or woman, whoever it might be, and you consider yourself an equal, you consider yourself valuable and present, they will have in some ways no choice but to respond the way that you project your reality. But they don't know your reality coming in until you tell them what it is. So I think that's where the law of meaning kind of comes in, because it's like, you made it mean you're not good enough.
Spitting some gold there, friend.
Well, dude, this was my issue.
For me.
So much of my life was struggling, and it would be weird because I would bounce between these two sides of being this guy who was super confident and could just go up and ask women out, and then at the same time just being this guy who just didn't believe he was good enough and thought he was totally unworthy. And the problem is that because I was so unaware of like all this stuff going on, it was like very like roller coaster. So it was inconsistent at times. And I would go through these spouts of like confidence where it was like for a few days, few weeks, few months maybe, I was like really rock and roll. And then for a few days, few weeks, few months, I was like, oh man, like I just can't, I don't know, like I don't feel good about myself. And then I would start to go, well, it's because I didn't get my hair cut. It's because I'm not dressed as well today. And that would make meaning about why I felt that way. The wild thing is that that's not actually what the meaning was, but you start to make it up, you know, and and then you tell the story, and that's where story kind of comes in, you know. But yeah. So anyway, I mean, I feel like there's a bunch of other things we still want to get into, and we still got a little time. So let's dig into it.
Why don't we just talk about this quick?
It's going down fast.
Going down real fast.
This is a good one.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about this beer. And this is not an advertisement, by the way. We just have beer on the podcast to spur on conversation. I don't know what it is about this beer, but it's just so like easy to drink.
Yeah. This is one of the better. This is a wit beer from Deep Cove. This is called Watershed, and a lot of times wit beers they can be a bit too sour, or they can be really like,
or sometimes a little too dry.
I typically like them, but sometimes it can be. But this one's like got some really great stuff happening in it.
It's got like a good taste to it, but like also like almost like it almost is like a light lager, but like with a little bit more flavor. Because I find like if some people like the Budweisers and the Bud Light and Canadian and Kokanee and all those kind of like watery light beers. I find that for me now, after I've had so many craft beers, I don't find as much enjoyment out of those other than I just want a cold beer sometimes.
Yeah.
But like this is kind of like giving me that cold beer feeling, but with the added flavor of a nice craft beer. Yeah. So it's kind of got both of the worlds. So
it's got a lot of flavor, but it doesn't have a lingering kind of aftertaste to it. It's just kind of like,
drink it and you're done.
Yeah, you drink it, it's refreshing.
And then you want another sip.
Then you want another sip. So this is a winner. This is one of the better.
But what does it all mean?
What does it mean?
Okay, well, I promised I would say this, and I just want to say this right now because it might get lost in the mix. What's the meaning of life? I said that we would talk about that. Here, if you haven't figured it out by now, it's whatever you make it. It's not some objective idea. It's not something. There's no grand meaning. We're not all in on it, withholding it from you. Yeah. It's you make it up, and you need to figure out what your meaning is. And we can maybe get into that, but like, if you're looking for like, what does it all mean? You don't look outward to other people in the world. Look within. You'll find it in your values. Yeah. You'll find it in things that you care about.
Well, it's interesting because like the best sort of answer I've actually heard to that question, which still I don't think that what you're saying and that what we're saying here is even in conflict with that, was one of my favorite philosophers, Alan Watts, who said, it's like the meaning of life is so plain and obvious to me. It's like, which is to be alive. For him that was it. It's just like, it's just to be alive. That's the meaning of life. Like, it doesn't need to be any more than that. But with that goes into, we have all of these we have billions of people on this planet. So it's to be alive as you, as who you are, and the things that have meaning to you. And the things that have meaning to you, and especially like, we're talking as artists, those meanings become our expression in the world, in our jobs, in our work, in our creations, in our relationships, those meanings become our expression. And when we have a healthy expression, we bring light into the world. And I think that that's where getting in contact with meaning in our lives, becoming conscious of meaning in our lives, and how that is shaping and affecting us, we can create more of the expression that we want to create. We can follow our calling a little bit more. We get in touch with what really is important, what really has meaning and matters to us, right? I think that's great stuff.
I think with Alan Watts and his point, the meaning is to be alive. I think that's not what's satisfactory for most people. Like, they're not satisfied with that answer. And although I agree, I think it's true, I think it's also like, the thing is that there may not be some meaning that's like, you're put on this earth to do this thing and God sent you here, or the universe defined you, or something like that. I mean, it may or it may not happen. Here's the thing, you won't know. But what you can do right now is you can find something you can give. And I think what the thing is life is like, if you're content with life, and life becomes a ride, and it becomes a journey, it becomes a play, it becomes a thing for you to experience, then it becomes, well, how do I want to experience it? And I think that's really where the question leads to. And it just becomes down to this. Is stop looking at what you can get and start looking at what you can give. Mm-hmm. And so many people like hate to hear this.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, great. But like, give to get what? It's like, no, that's not how it works. Like, you will get, don't even worry about getting. Like, if you make life about getting something, you will surely get nothing.
You know, you said something earlier today, and it's been sticking with me today.
Okay.
I'm really, like, it's been things. Kind of like, it's been like really like, just kind of like there. And you're talking about doing. It's like, you know, what am I, you know, it's like, all right, so what do I need to do? What do I need to, you know, and it's kind of the same way with like give. For some, it's like, okay, well, what do I have to give? Like, what am I giving? You know, you said share instead of, you know, what am I trying to do? What am I doing here? What do I have to share? You know, can be another take on it, a slight flip on this whole thing that opens up a new possibility, a new potential. You know, it's like, what do you have to share? Because that's the same thing as giving. But what do you have to share? It's like, what is the piece of you? What is a piece of you that you feel could be important? Maybe not, but what do you think could be important that you have, that you can share with other people? An experience, you know, a talent, an ability, a skill, something. What do you have to share? That's the thing to give, you know, in some regard.
I think so. I mean, I think, you know, it's when you think about sharing and giving, it presumes abundance. When you think getting, it assumes scarcity.
Yeah.
Because, and it's quite plain and quite simple, yet, you know, our culture is so indoctrinated in the idea of getting and achieving and all of this stuff. And achieving is all right, but not achieving in the sake of getting, but achieving and making a giving impact is an achievement. Mm-hmm. I think the thing is we're wildly messed up in our minds about what achievement actually is.
Yeah.
Like, we see achievement as I get the award. It's like, no, you gave the performance.
Yeah. We
awarded you for it as a byproduct.
Yeah.
You didn't get the reward. We gave it to you. We gave it to you. Mm-hmm. Give. That's the thing. Like, people have a very difficult time wrapping their head around it. It was not what you got. It was what you gave. And even when you get something, it's in sense, the whole point is to give it.
Yeah.
It's weird, but people still get stuck on the getting. Like, that's the end. That's the start of it.
Yeah, and I think it's it comes from, and I think it's weird. I think this is a kind of a dying part of where we're at collectively, which is, you know, because that's very much in my mind comes from, you know, we come from an attitude of there's a winner and there's a loser in everything. You know, like even in collaborative ventures and stuff like that, there's still the sense of someone is going to lose. Someone has to lose in everything. So we start to see everything in that light. And if you're not a winner, you're a loser. You know, there's like Ricky Bobby.
Yeah, right. Talladega Nights.
Whatever it is. But I did want to like just kind of pay some homage to, was part of what kind of got us into this conversation, which is a fantastic must-read book, which is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Viktor E. Frankl.
Viktor E. Frankl. I don't know if many people include the initial in there. I think most people just go Viktor Frankl. But
all right,
whatever.
Well, it's there.
It's a fantastic, unbelievable book.
I think a necessity to read. Yeah. Honestly, like I think. You know, I just finished reading it, and and I wanted to mention it as well. I mean, it's one of my top 10 favorite books of all time ever read, maybe even top 5. I haven't really done the list in a long time, but it's up there. I mean, it is one of the things that, provided if I ever do have children or any student I ever have, I will refer this book as one of the books to read.
Yeah.
Because it has been profoundly life-changing for me, the read of it. And
it has that potential.
And it's so meaningful.
Yeah.
No, but it really just takes a lot of what we're talking about, and it, just read it. It's so valuable.
Mm-hmm. But there was one thing that we haven't really gotten into in this discussion. I want to maybe see if we can glance on it a little bit here, which is suffering.
Yeah.
We haven't really talked about suffering and adversity, extraordinary challenge to us, which is, this is one of the beautiful things about meaning, where meaning offers us incredible grace in our lives, which is like a gift, which is that we can apply meaning to the greatest hardships of our lives. And we can find meaning in the whole thing, as opposed to being victims to the thing that happened, the event, the whatever it was. And we can extract something extraordinarily profound that creates a new path forward, I guess, in our lives. Because we can very often get stuck, as we were talking about before we started recording, but it's our culture too kind of perpetuates this, where we can get very much stuck in reliving our past, reliving our traumas, and saying, well, I'm this way because of this. And it's not that there isn't some degree that we can recognize that, but that we can get trapped in that space and lose sight of a bigger picture. Meaning can be brought into these situations, and we can say, you know what, maybe I went through that so that I could come through that and have an experience where I can help other people who have been through this or who are struggling with this, or maybe I've been through this so somebody else didn't have to go through this. This is where meaning can transform something. We're changing our relationship and meaning. So, man, I guess we're realizing how relationship is tied to this one as well. Our meanings and relationships, for sure, with everything in our lives, not just people, but the events. And changing those meanings, discovering new meanings, getting a little bit creative sometimes. Sometimes asking these questions and putting these events and memories under kind of examination and saying, well, this is the meaning I've created, and this meaning around it just causes me nothing but heartache and despair and sadness. And, I've been living with this for years, decades for some things, for many of us. Mm-hmm. Almost entire lifetimes for some things. And we can go back and look at these things and say, okay, well, what could have there be in here underneath all of it? And it's interesting that in mythology, in so much of our mythology from different cultures, there's a story of the hero journeying into the underworld of some kind, journeying into the dark, journeying into the dungeon, the cave, slaying the dragon, slaying the demon. And through doing that, making that journey, they come out with the gold. They come out with the treasure that was there, but you had to go and look at it because there is something there. There's actually something of value in that darkness, and that gold is the meaning. That gold is finding meaning that gives us I'm not going to say always, but has the potential to give us new possibilities and bright path ahead of us. That thing can become that trauma, that hardship can become the light that we use to fulfill something really wonderful and beautiful. Mm-hmm. But that comes down to us making a decision to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, oh man, I think when it comes to all this stuff, it's like, if you don't have suffering, if you don't have some point of pain, some point of adversity, in many ways things are meaningless. And I think instead of us looking at adversity as this thing to avoid, we should almost look at it as this thing to seek out, because what is adverse will be meaningful and important and valuable. And, Viktor Frankl goes into this and talks about how, this was going to be a problem for our culture, and already was at the time when he wrote the book, but that comfort and complacency and all these things, these automated things, were going to actually cause depression. What do you see happening? There's an epidemic of depression. Things are becoming more and more comfortable, more and more automated. And the thing is that the more we take adversity out of our lives, which is a human thing, we just keep trying to do that, we end up finding out that it actually is what causes us to have less meaningful lives. And adversity, just for adversity, for the sake of adversity, is pointless. But adversity for the sake of meaning is powerful. Like waking up at 4 a.m. to drive my kid to hockey practice. I don't have a kid. I never did this, but parents do this all the time. Mm-hmm. Right? All sorts of adversity. I think about all the training I did in sports. I think about all the times, all the money I invested in doing the stuff I did. There's adversity to that. Not going out for drinks with friends so I could stay home and write a script because I believed in making the show I was making. I never would have done that had I not had a reason to do it. These were difficult choices to make, but they made it more meaningful. Mm-hmm. I share a story quickly, actually. I shared this earlier, but I think it's kind of interesting. I've been playing this game, Ghost Recon's Wildlands.
Yeah.
Ghost Recon Wildlands. And I've been playing it, and so I beat the game. I beat it in full, and then they created a new option where after you beat it in full, you can reach level 30. It's an open world game. Open world, you're a soldier in basically Bolivia trying to take down the cartel. You're a bunch of soldiers. Anyway, and then I played through this tier 1 level, which is basically an extreme difficulty. And I made it most of the way through tier 1. And then I realized there was another option. You could beat the game on a mode called Ghost Mode. Ghost Mode is that you have one life. And if you die, you lose everything. Every asset you got, everything you collected, your character, your story progression, everything. You have to start from square one all over. Your character has died. You don't even get to use that character. You have to make a new character again.
Yeah, it's game over.
It's game over. And so...
you die, it is game over, like real life.
Right, so it's playing this game, and the goal is to get to level 30 and then to beat the game. Those are the goals, essentially, and beat all the little territories of the game. Well, I did it, and I'm going along, and I made it to level 17, and then I died. And then I played again, and I made it to level 15, and then I died. And both times, there's a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of energy put into this, and I was like, man, what the hell? So now I'm playing, my character's at level 26, I'm making my way through the game, and what happens is I've experienced the adversity of the game. I've experienced the preciousness of the life of the character. Mm-hmm. And now there was a moment where, to get down to this level, I had to jump off a cliff, and you can kind of do this, but it's a risk. You could die doing it. And instead of doing that, I didn't do it. I took the safe way around because it mattered. It was meaningful because I knew that risking my life over something stupid could cause me to lose the whole game, just like in real life.
Yeah.
So the thing is the adversity of life is that we can die. If we couldn't die, we would do all sorts of stuff, but it would be meaningless in a way.
Yeah, and
know what I mean?
I've heard that as like a philosophical teaching for a lot of people. When we confront this problem, this issue that we see in our lives is of death. You know, this is something that we're all confronted with. This is an inevitable thing that we all have to face. But there's this argument saying, yeah, but death is essential to life, because without death, then there would be no meaning.
Yes.
It wouldn't be important. Nothing would be important to us. So it's a critical component to living in a weird way. Death is critical to living.
Well, you know,
living fully.
I said something several podcasts ago, and I've been thinking a lot about it over the last few weeks, because I shared this thing, and, you know, there's the whole idea of write your, after you die, write your, what's it called? Basically
the eulogy.
Your eulogy, right? Write your eulogy, and I suggested write your suicide note, which is a very controversial thing to say, but I'm just gonna, I'm just gonna point this out. The reason why I suggested writing your suicide note out just for an exercise for yourself is because person who's suicidal, person who's going through something like this, you know, you might be like, well, I don't really care if I live. Living is suffering, and I want to end the suffering. Mm-hmm. If you write out your suicide note, what you're going to do is you're going to realize that others are going to suffer for you doing it, and that's the point. See, the person who's in the suicidal point is only thinking about themselves, which is most people's problems in general. But when you start to realize that other people, it will affect other people, that other people will read the note, you'll first of all, you start to realize that if you wrote the note, a lot of the problems or complaints you have could be solved. And the other thing is you start to see that the people reading it, you might actually experience empathy for how they might feel about you doing this, and imagine what they could have done to maybe save you. And that will actually give you meaning, because you'll see that your meaning is something you give, not something you get. And the thing is the person who's in the get, it's ultimately in some way suicidal, because you become so selfish, self-involved, self-centered, that you literally make yourself so small you don't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. And life is about existing, and as we talked about earlier, expression, and that's where the artist comes in. It's about, how do I express myself?
Well, it's like what were the things that Frankl talks about as meaning? There's suffering, there's love,
and then creation or achievement.
Or achievement. Yeah. These are things that tend to be the main themes of
that's
what
where
gives
we
us
find meaning.
Meaning, yeah.
And you can relate them to everything. I mean, achievement and whatever creation is basically you believe in building a gift to give to others. Love is that you believe that your existence or being, and I'm summarizing, but has a connection to another person that matters.
Yeah.
And then suffering is that you see that the suffering you're going through actually is the very thing you need to give you service for what you're supposed to do beyond the suffering.
Right.
That you believe the suffering is actually an opportunity and a gift.
Right.
And that's where all meaning really is derived from these types of things.
Yeah.
Which, if you think about it, they're all just gifts. You just look at how everything is giving you something.
Yeah.
And you're giving through gift, you know?
And in this way, we can sort of look at everything in our lives as just material for us to create great meaning.
Yeah.
You know?
Which I think is like ultimately like, and we asked this question. I love, you always bring this up, or at least recently you have a lot, which is how would the master artist use the law of meaning? Mm. And I think it's such a great question to ask with every law. How would the master artist use this law? So I think that's how I'm going to end it. I'm going to talk about what I think and then maybe share yours.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the master artist would use the law of meaning to figure out what their gift is, and to figure out how their gift, what they can give, what they can share, what they can put upon the world or give to others or do, can bring about more of what they value and enjoy. And the byproduct of that will be happiness and fulfillment and all these wonderful things. I think the master artist doesn't look for fulfillment. They live fulfillment. They essentially find meaning in things, and then they gain fulfillment and happiness and such. I think a person who doesn't see themselves as an artist or struggles. Oh, we just got a phone call.
Got a call.
Caller number live. 1. You're live. It's still going. No one ever calls these days.
Yeah.
So I didn't expect it to happen. Anyway.
That's why I keep rolling.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So
You lost your train of thought?
Lost my train of thought. Let's just hold for this call.
How long is this thing? Jesus.
People, they ring 6-7 times. Okay.
All right.
Here we go. So I'm looking at it this way. We have a gift, we have a thing, we have something that we can create, some kind of love we can share, or some kind of suffering that's necessary for us to go through so that others don't have to, or some type of suffering or adversity we need to go through so that we can build something we otherwise couldn't. Mm-hmm. And the master artist would look at suffering and adversity as an opportunity to build what they otherwise couldn't. They would look at the thing they're creating as something that they value in the world, and they don't worry whether others value it. They just trust that because they value it, someone else does, and that they have something in them to give for another, and that's their love. And the love, whether it's reciprocated or not, is irrelevant. But your love of your art, your love of these people, your love of a person or whatever, it's all within you, and that's where the master artist gets the most out of this law.
All right. I don't know what I have necessarily to say about this at this point. But, I think that, I don't really know what I have to say as a closing comment as far as how the master uses meaning. I think that the master artist understands that their meanings are their own, and as are everyone else's. But the master does not let that stop them from expressing what their truth is. They use I think that the master understands and has looked at all of the experiences of their lives and has derived a conscious meaning out of it. And then uses their expression to share that, to kind of bring in a few of these elements that we talked about. Then they share that expression with others, and then they let it be. They let that be, because it's not up to the master to determine how someone's supposed to feel about it, whether someone's supposed to agree with them, but to let it speak for itself and to just trust and honor the work and how people will respond to it as being perfectly fine, perfectly okay. And it's not a deterrent in any way.
Just to comment on what you said, and you mentioned earlier how you're working with the word, your calling. Mm-hmm. I feel like your calling can be kind of a feeling you don't fully understand, and the master artist would trust the feeling. They would trust the calling they have without necessarily totally being aware and conscious of it all the time, but trusting that it will lead to a new awareness and a new, understanding, but maybe not immediately. And the artist, the master artist, goes with the feeling and doesn't have to have everything answered to do so.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember who wrote it, and I'm paraphrasing it. This is my classic move, but it's like it was the sentiment of it was to basically to be at peace with all that is unresolved within you, and all of the questions that you have no answers to, and instead to live the questions, and one day perhaps you will live into and stumble upon the answers, but not to get hung up on the things that you don't know, but rather to just live the question, live the not knowing, and that will bring you to a place, perhaps.
That's awesome.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you got something out of this, if you feel it improved your life or your journey in any way, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode.
You can also support us on Patreon, where we have tons of great bonuses. You are the ones that make the show possible and help us to thrive. Thank you for joining us.